Hi, everybody. Tonight, I invite you to lie back, take a deep breath, and let your mind drift with me as we journey through the clouds of time into a world where gods love like mortals and mortals paid the price of divine desire. This is a story about the lovers of Zeus, the king of the gods in ancient Greek mythology, and the heartbreak, mystery, and consequence that followed each romance. It's a tale woven with stars, oaths, secrets, and sorrow. In this first part, we begin with the first notes of this eternal melody, soft and haunting. Let's start where all things begin, with a god, a thunderbolt, and a desire that shaped the fate of heaven and earth. Zeus, the ruler of Olympus, was not always a king. Before the throne, there was a war. Before the war, there was fear. Born to the titan Cronus and the goddess Rhea, Zeus was the sixth child. But unlike his siblings, swallowed whole by their father in paranoia, he was hidden away. Rhea, desperate to save at least one of her children, wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and fed it to Cronus, then entrusted Zeus to the nymphs of Mount Ida. The boy grew with fire in his eyes. He learned to walk in silence, trained to speak in thunder. One day, he would return to free his siblings and challenge the Titans. But even before the war was over, the echo of something else stirred inside him. Something older than conquest, more dangerous than ambition. It was longing. Not just for power, but for closeness, for possession, for love, or at least what a god like Zeus called love. But when a god loves, it is not like when a man loves. The sky doesn't simply open, it tears. Mortals don't merely blush, they burn. That's what makes this story not a romance, but a series of laments. Our first tale isn't one of the most well-known, but perhaps one of the most tragic. Metis, the goddess of wisdom and cunning. Long before Hera, before the temples, before even Olympus was complete, there was Metis. Zeus fell for her mind before her form. She was brilliant, clever, and saw through illusions with ease. It said that Zeus admired her intellect, her calm way of predicting outcomes. She helped him trick Cronus into vomiting out his swallowed siblings. She advised him on war. She soothed the rage of battle with thoughtful silence. She was the first to speak softly to a god of storms. But as the Titans fell and Olympus rose, a prophecy emerged, one that would mark the beginning of sorrow. The oracle whispered, Metis would bear Zeus a child, a daughter more wise than her mother. But if she bore a second child, a son, he would be greater than his father and overthrow Zeus. The same fear that consumed Cronus now pulsed through Zeus's veins. He could not bear to lose what he had won. Not now, not after all this. So he chose a path of cruelty disguised as necessity. Zeus invited Metis for a walk beside the edge of the world. There, where time trickled like honey and the stars hadn't yet found their constellations, he spoke sweetly, told her he needed her advice, that he still needed her mind beside him. He watched her relax into trust. She didn't notice the shift in his tone, the slight flinch of guilt, and then with a single divine breath, he opened his mouth wide and swallowed her whole. She screamed only once, then silence. The other gods didn't know. They saw Zeus return with a heavier gaze, quieter than usual, but he told no one, yet he couldn't silence her completely. Inside his body, Metis lived still, whispering, advising, dreaming. She stirred his thoughts, gave him plans, helped him rule. And as time passed, he began to suffer, visions, pain, blinding migraines that no healer could cure. Then one day, in a moment that would become legend, he screamed louder than thunder, and his head split open. From the crack, bathed in golden light, sprang a warrior fully grown, Athena, born from thought and agony, calm, just, impossibly wise. She would never know her mother. Metis, still locked inside her father's flesh, would fade into myth and memory, her love, her sacrifice, reduced to a footnote in Athena's birth. But some say on quiet nights when the sky is clear and no storms rage, you can hear Metis whispering from the stars, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the tired tone of a mother who gave all she had and vanished before she was known. And Zeus, he would never speak of her again. This was only the beginning. For gods, the cost of love is rarely equal. For mortals, it's often fatal. When you're ready, when the shadows grow long again, we will speak of another name. One whispered in reeds and mourned by rivers. Her name was Io, but not tonight. Rest now. Let the tale of Metis linger in your dreams. The winds had changed. Above the land of Argos, the clouds took on a strange heaviness, not of storm or rain, but of sorrow suspended in the sky. It was here that our second story begins, among cattle fields and sacred temples where a young priestess named Io once lived. Io was devoted, gentle, and beautiful in a way that made even the birds pause in their flight to look upon her. She served Hera, queen of the gods, with grace and reverence, lighting incense, weaving wreaths, and walking barefoot on marble floors polished by centuries of footsteps. She asked for nothing and expected even less. But beauty in the world of gods is not a blessing, it is a beacon. And soon the king of Olympus noticed. Zeus first saw her from a distance, a flicker of white robes moving through the olive groves. There was something about her stillness, the way she moved like the wind was speaking only to her. He began to watch her often, sometimes as a cloud, other times as a bird in the tree. He whispered to her in dreams, called to her across the silence of her prayers. At first she tried to ignore it, but then the dreams grew stranger, filled with golden light and murmured promises. She became restless, her prayers interrupted by feelings she could not name. Her heart, once steady in ritual, began to quicken, and one night, unable to bear the confusion, she left the temple and wandered into the woods. There in the moonlight, Zeus appeared, not as a god, not at first, but as a man with eyes like storm clouds and a voice low as thunder. He told her not to be afraid, that he had watched her, not out of malice but love. He told her that her soul shone brighter than any constellation, that her presence had awakened something in him that even Hera could not stir. Io stood still, her breath shallow. She did not know whether to run or bow. She did neither. Instead, she whispered, "I am sworn to Hera. I serve the goddess." But Zeus, the god of oaths and breakers of them alike, took her hand and said, "You serve beauty itself, and I am its king." His voice was soft, his eyes kind. And so in that moment, Io fell. Whether she chose him or he chose for her is something no tale can say with certainty, only that the sky held its breath that night. But clouds do not keep secrets. Hera, ever watchful, felt the tremble of deceit in the heavens. She descended from Olympus, her steps like cold wind on the world. Zeus, in panic, turned to his power of disguise. In a desperate act, he transformed Io into a white heifer, sleek, strong, and silent. He thought he had hidden his shame, but Hera was no fool. "Oh," she said sweetly, eyeing the heifer. "What a lovely animal. May I have her, husband?" Zeus had no choice but to nod. And so Hera took the heifer Io, placed her under the watch of Argus Panoptes, the all-seeing giant with 100 eyes, none of which ever closed. Io, in her new form, could not speak, could not scream, could not plead. She wandered fields in sorrow, her hooves leaving shallow prints in the earth. Her eyes, though bovine, still shimmered with human tears. She watched the world move on around her, a prisoner of another's desire, punished for being seen. Zeus, aching with guilt, sent Hermes to rescue her. The messenger god approached Argus with a flute and a smile, playing music so sweet, so laced with sleep, that one by one, Argus's eyes closed, all 100. And then, with a single swift blow, Hermes killed the watchman. Hera mourned not for Io, but for her lost servant. She took the eyes of Argus and set them into the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock, as a reminder of vigilance and betrayal. But Io's journey was not yet over. Even freed, she was still cursed. Hera sent a gadfly to torment her, to sting her endlessly, so she could never rest, never find peace. Io ran, across valleys, through deserts, into the sea. She crossed lands so far and wide that they took on new names, the Ionian Sea after her, the Bosphorus, meaning cow's passage. She ran until her hooves bled, until her mind frayed at the edges of thought. In Egypt, finally, she collapsed. There the gods took pity. Zeus found her once more, and for a fleeting moment, mercy returned to Olympus. He touched her gently and restored her human form. But even then, even free of horns and hoof, she did not return to Greece. She stayed in Egypt, far from the land where her name had become a whispered warning. Some say she bore Zeus a child. Some say she became a goddess herself, known to the Egyptians as Isis. Perhaps that is mercy. Or perhaps it is just another version of forgetting. What remains is the echo of her steps across continents, the trembling silence of her eyes, and the memory of a woman loved by a god, and punished for it by another. In the end, her beauty carved rivers, etched myths, and painted skies. But it also left her broken. When gods love, the earth trembles. But when goddesses are jealous, the world burns. Io was caught in between, and no temple could save her from that. Tomorrow we may speak of another, a boy with hair like flame and a heart too human for Olympus. But not yet. Let the memory of hooves in exile wander your dreams. Let the tale of Io linger where sorrow settles, high in the wild air of Mount Pelion, where the mist dances like secrets across the slopes and time forgets itself among the trees. A boy was born. His name was Ganymede, and he was perhaps the most beautiful mortal the gods had ever seen. He was not a warrior, nor a prophet, nor a priest. He was a shepherd, a boy who tended flocks on the green hills of Troy, barefoot in the dew, his eyes reflecting the sky as if he had been carved from its very light. His laughter echoed like wind chimes in the canyons, and when he walked, the flowers tilted slightly toward him, as if nature itself leaned in. But it was not nature that watched him most closely. It was the sky. Zeus saw him one morning as a golden eagle, gliding silently through the pale dawn mist. The boy was alone, humming an old lullaby as he poured water into a trough for his sheep. The gods circled once, then again still. There was something in the boy's serenity that struck Zeus not with desire alone, but with something stranger. Longing, perhaps. Loneliness, perhaps. Or something deeper still, buried beneath centuries of power and pride. Ganymede looked up, sensing a presence, but saw only a blur of wings and cloud. Still his heart skipped. Zeus did not descend that day. He watched for many mornings more. He came as wind, stirring the grass around the boy's ankles, as a shadow that passed over the rocks, as a soft murmur in the trees, and each time the boy seemed to sense it, not fearfully, but with curiosity, and maybe in time with a kind of silent invitation. One evening, as the sun spilled molten gold across the western sky, Zeus made his decision. He came not as man or cloud this time, but as lightning, sudden, absolute, and terrifying. In an instant, the world split open, and before the shepherd boy could scream or pray or run, a massive eagle, divine and shining, descended and carried him into the heavens. No one saw him vanish. No blood was left on the grass. Just a single sandal, still warm from his foot, and a flock of sheep bleating nervously at the empty sky. His family searched for weeks. His father tore his hair in mourning, blaming wolves, blaming raiders, blaming the gods themselves. But there was no grave to weep at, no body to bury. Ganymede, meanwhile, rose. Olympus was not what he expected. It was vast, shimmering, and cold in its majesty. The gods watched him with mixed gazes, some curious, some amused, some jealous. Hera was silent, her lips pressed like storm clouds, her eyes never meeting his. Zeus welcomed him as one welcomes a rare treasure. He gave him robes spun from sunlight, sandals that never wore, a golden goblet that never emptied. He sat him at his side and declared him cupbearer to the gods, an honor, he claimed, never before bestowed on a mortal. But what is an honor when it comes with invisible chains? Each day, Ganymede poured nectar, smiled politely, endured the whispers. The gods did not love as mortals did, and though Zeus never forced his hand nor raised his voice, the boy knew he was no longer free. His heart, still tender from the grassy fields of Troy, ached for the sound of sheep, the warmth of earth, the soft laughter of brothers. Zeus, for all his might, was not blind. He saw the sadness blooming in Ganymede's eyes like frost across spring, and perhaps for the first time in his long existence, he felt something akin to guilt. So he offered the boy a gift. "You shall not die," he said one twilight as stars unfolded above them. "You shall remain young forever, bright as the dawn, your name etched in the constellations." And so, Zeus placed him in the heavens as Aquarius, the water bearer, a symbol of service, of beauty, of youth captured and suspended. From earth, the people of Troy looked up and whispered myths around firelight, that the boy had been chosen, that he now lived among the stars, that he was a god. But those closest to him, the sheep who waited for his return, the hills that missed his footsteps, the father who still dreamt of his voice, knew the truth, that he was taken. And Ganymede? Perhaps in the quiet of the celestial sphere, he smiles now and then. Perhaps he watches shepherd boys on lonely hills and wonders what his life might have been if Zeus had simply watched and not reached. Immortality is not a reward for the unwilling, and to be loved by a god is not always to be blessed. Sometimes it is only to be made into a story that others tell to explain the stars. But for Ganymede, the stars were never the sky. Home had always been below, in the grass, in the light that touched his skin without burning. Still, he remains, shining silent, a boy plucked from time, pouring water forever into an endless cosmos. Far from Olympus, beyond the humming pines of Thessaly and the shifting sands of Libya, there lived a woman whose name clung to history like ivy on stone. Her name was Leda, and her story begins not with love, but with wings. She was a queen, not of divine birth, not graced with prophecy or touched by muses, but a woman of fierce dignity and quiet strength. Married to Tyndareus, the king of Sparta, Leda ruled her household with grace. She bore herself with the poise of a swan gliding across a mirror lake, still above, but paddling deep beneath. Her days were filled with temple offerings, royal council, and long walks along the banks of the Eurotaz River. It was on one such walk during the early bloom of spring that the air changed. The sky dimmed without cloud, and the trees held their breath. A white swan, larger than any bird native to Greece, descended from the heavens with a slow elegance. Its feathers shimmered like pearls, and its eyes were not those of a bird. They were ancient, human, full of secrets and sorrow. Leda paused, watching as the creature approached. It did not cower or flap in panic. It moved with intention. And then she saw it was wounded, a gash along its side, deep and wet with blood. Its breathing labored. It collapsed at her feet. And something in her heart, a queen's heart, but also a mother's, opened. Without hesitation, she gathered the creature into her arms. Its feathers were impossibly soft, its body warm, almost unnaturally so. She whispered soothing words as she would to a frightened child, and in that moment it happened. The swan shifted, not with violence but with an unraveling. The bird dissolved, like mist curling into a new shape, and in its place stood a man, a god. His eyes were thunderclouds, his voice a lullaby of storms, Zeus. Leda did not scream, she did not flee, she stood frozen and still holding the remnants of feathers between her fingers. She knew his name, of course. Everyone did. But no knowledge prepares a woman to face a god in the flesh. He spoke gently, told her she had a kind heart, that he had come not to punish but to honor her compassion. He told her she was beautiful, not just in form but in spirit, the kind of beauty that endures beyond crowns and youth. And then, time fractured. Whether Leda welcomed him or whether Zeus simply took what he wanted, as he so often did, is lost to myth. The stories differ depending on who tells them. Some say she was seduced, others say she was deceived, some even say it was both. But what is known is this: that night Leda lay with two men, her husband Tyndareus and Zeus in the form of a swan, and soon after she laid two eggs. From the first egg hatched Castor and Clytemnestra, from the second came Pollux and Helen. One pair mortal, one pair touched by divinity. Twins, but not twins. A family stitched together with the thread of gods and men. Helen, the one whose face would launch 1,000 ships, came into the world not with cries, but with silence, eyes open, watching, as if she already knew what the world would demand of her. Clytemnestra, fierce and proud, would one day become a queen like her mother and take vengeance that shook kingdoms. Castor and Pollux, inseparable, would fight side by side in battle and beg for each other's immortality when death came for one. But that is what came later. In the beginning there was only Leda, holding eggs like oracles in her hands, unsure whether she had been chosen or cursed. Zeus did not return to her, not in the way she hoped. The swan never flew back over the Eurotaz River. No words of love followed, only silence, only legacy. Leda continued her role as queen, raising children who would become legends, hiding the ache of divine intrusion behind regal smiles. She never spoke of that spring evening again, but sometimes when the wind stirred the reeds and the water shimmered a certain way, she would pause and look skyward, not in longing but in wariness, as if she feared the return of wings. In art, they paint her cradling the swan, face tilted in tenderness. In story, they debate her agency. But Leda, the woman, remains elusive, a symbol, yes, but also a human heart caught in a god's flight path. And that is the tragedy of being seen by Zeus. Not whether you are loved or not, but whether you will be remembered as more than a consequence. Leda was not just the mother of beauty or vengeance or brotherhood. She was a woman who bore the weight of myths while still walking through the quiet corridors of her palace, nursing children who did not all belong to her husband and who may never have belonged to her world. The river still flows, the swans still glide, but none are ever quite as bright as the one that fell from heaven and changed the course of history. In the quiet folds of Thessaly, where the land is draped in olive groves and stories rise with the morning mist, there once lived a nymph who knew the value of silence. Her name was Callisto, and she bore the wildness of the forest in her step and the calm of starlight in her gaze. She served Artemis, not as a passive follower, but as one of the most devoted among her maiden huntresses. Artemis, goddess of the moon and the untamed, demanded purity, loyalty, and absolute freedom from the touch of men. Her band of companions lived outside the reach of Olympus and the affairs of mortals. They hunted beneath the silver sky, bathed in cool springs, and sang ancient songs that no longer echo in today's world. Callisto was swift, sharp-eyed, and bold in spirit. Among them, she was beloved, and Zeus watched. He did not appear to her in grand visions or soaring eagles. He watched quietly from afar, hidden among clouds that moved just slightly slower when she passed beneath. There was something about her, perhaps her closeness to Artemis, or the way her laughter lingered even after she had left a grove, that pierced through the weariness of eternity. But Callisto had made a vow, to Artemis, to herself. She had renounced the company of men. She had chosen wildness over wifedom, loyalty over longing. Zeus, ever persistent, did not confront her with thunder or plead with gifts. No, he chose deception. One afternoon, as Callisto wandered alone through a glade, following the print of a deer, Artemis appeared, at least so it seemed. Clad in moonlight, bow in hand, she beckoned the nymph closer. Callisto smiled unguarded and ran toward her. She knelt beside her mistress and spoke softly, recounting the hunt, the wind, the rustle of wings above. Then Artemis leaned forward and kissed her, and in that kiss, everything shifted. The moonlight became too warm, the silence too thick, and before Callisto could pull away, the disguise unraveled. The figure before her changed, not a goddess, but a god. Zeus, she gasped, she trembled, but it was too late. What happened next is told in many versions, all painful. Some say he seduced her, others that he forced her. All agree that Callisto's body was taken, and her vow shattered. She fled the glade in silence, unable to speak what she could barely understand herself. For days, she avoided the eyes of her sisters, bathing in isolation, praying for Artemis to forgive her or not to notice. But the gods do not miss such shifts. One day, as the huntresses gathered at a spring, Artemis called for her companions to undress and join her in the waters. Callisto hesitated, trembling. She tried to step away, but it was too late. Her tunic slipped, and the growing swell of her belly was revealed. Gasps rang through the trees. Artemis, cold and proud, saw not a victim but a broken oath. She did not ask questions. She did not offer shelter. With a voice like sharpened frost, she banished Callisto from her company. And Callisto, pregnant, ashamed, and alone, wandered into the wilderness. She gave birth beneath a cypress tree, far from temples and torches. A boy. She named him Arcas. His cries were soft, almost uncertain, as if the world he had entered already weighed heavy on his tiny chest. For a time she raised him in hiding, whispered lullabies, taught him which berries were sweet, how to step softly through brush. But fate is a net that gods never fail to cast. Hera, ever watchful, learned of Callisto and her child. Rage consumed her, not just at Zeus's betrayal, but at the reminder of it, living and breathing in the forest. She descended like fire, and with a single touch, transformed Callisto into a bear. A great she-bear with sorrow in her eyes and the voice of a mother locked inside fur and fang. For years, Callisto roamed the woods as a beast. She watched her son grow from afar, unable to hold him, speak to him, or protect him with anything but distance. Arcas, unaware of his mother's form, became a skilled hunter. One day, deep in the forest, their paths crossed. She froze. He did not. Seeing only a bear, he drew his bow. His hands were steady, his aim true, and at that instant, Zeus intervened. The sky split open, and both mother and son were lifted into the heavens, Callisto becoming Ursa Major, the great bear, Arcas, Ursa Minor, her cub. They shined still, eternal silhouettes against the night, but Hera, unrelenting, cursed even this. She forbade the stars of the bears from dipping below the horizon to rest in the ocean's embrace, ensuring they would circle the sky forever, visible but weary, eternal but denied peace. Callisto's tale is not just one of love or betrayal. It is about identity stolen, devotion punished, and a woman reshaped by the choices of gods. She did not ask for divinity, nor for desire. She asked only to remain wild and loyal. Instead, she became legend. Now when the night is clear and the stars carve slow circles above, we look up and see her there, still watching, still mourning, still mother, a bearer of stories the heavens will never let us forget. In the shaded valleys near the river Ladon, where the light of day filtered softly through thick canopies of pine and laurel, lived a nymph named Europa, not the one who would be carried away by a bull, but her namesake's distant kin, a woman of grace and gravity. Yet this is not her story. It is her sister's, another daughter of the river, whose name was Calero. But even she is not the heart of this part. Instead, we look toward the ancient city of Thebes, where a woman named Semele once walked the stone paths of her father's palace, unaware that she would one day carry in her womb both glory and fire. Semele was no queen. She was not a huntress, not a sorceress, not even a priestess. She was simply a mortal woman, young, thoughtful, and radiant in the quiet way that draws the attention of forces far beyond the mortal world. Her hair was the color of ink steeped in sunlight. Her voice, soft as figs ripening in late summer. She worshipped the gods with sincere reverence, never imagining she would become the focus of their divine gaze. But gods, as we know, are drawn not only to greatness, but to the gentle shimmer of unassuming beauty. And so, Zeus noticed her. He first appeared to her in dreams. At night, she would feel her chamber grow warm. The torches would flicker as if stirred by a breath not quite of this world. She saw him, not as a man at first, but as golden mist, as the scent of thunder in the distance, as a hand that never quite touched but always lingered. She awoke each morning flushed, confused, unsure of whether she was being haunted or blessed. One evening, as she walked alone among the pomegranates in her family's garden, the air grew still. The birds hushed. The leaves trembled without wind. And Zeus appeared, not cloaked in deception this time, but in a form she could see, touch, and understand. A man impossibly tall, dressed in robes stitched with twilight. He spoke her name like it was older than language. He told her she was chosen, that her beauty had awakened something in him, that he had watched her, loved her, and would give her anything she asked. And Semele, trembling, allowed herself to be drawn into his orbit. What passed between them in those nights is lost to time. Some say it was love, others a divine performance where she could only follow the script. But whatever it was, it changed her. Soon her body swelled with life. She carried the child of a god, but not all looked upon this union with favor. Hera, as ever, learned of Zeus's wandering heart, but this time it was not merely jealousy, it was fury shaped like elegance. She did not storm into Olympus demanding vengeance. Instead, she descended in disguise. She came to Semele as an old woman, veiled and hunched, her voice sweetened with age and wisdom. She found the girl alone, tending to an altar, and sat beside her. "You seem troubled, dear one," she said. "I am not," Semele replied, but her hands trembled as she touched her belly. "You carry a child," the woman said, smiling. "And by your glow, I suspect it is not mortal." Semele nodded. "It is Zeus's." "Truly?" the woman asked, her voice tilting with curiosity. "Did he come to you as he truly is, or as a man in disguise?" Semele hesitated. "As a man," she whispered. "Then how do you know?" The woman pressed gently. "The gods are known for tricks. If you are to bear his child, surely he would show you his true form, no?" Semele's confidence began to crack. The old woman placed a withered hand on hers. "Ask him," she said. "Make him swear on the river Styx, then you will know." And so, when next Zeus came to her, she smiled through her doubt and said, "You say you love me." "I do," he replied. "Then grant me a wish," she said. "Swear it on the river Styx." Zeus, bound by oath and desire, agreed. "Show me your true form," she said. "Let me see the god who loves me." Zeus's eyes darkened. "You do not know what you ask." "But I must know," she said softly. "I must." And so, in sorrow more than wrath, Zeus stood back and revealed himself. The sky split open, thunder roared, lightning coiled around his body like serpents of fire. The air burned with the raw pulse of creation. He became the god of gods, not cloaked in gentleness, but in his pure and overwhelming essence. And Semele, mortal and fragile, saw. Her scream was brief. Her body burst into flame, consumed by the force of divinity. She died with eyes wide open, but inside her something clung to life, a god yet unborn. Zeus, in desperation and grief, reached into the blaze and rescued what remained, the small, still-forming body of their child. He stitched the baby into his thigh, the only womb left to a god, and carried him there until the time of birth. That child would become Dionysus, the god of wine, madness, ecstasy, and resurrection, the only Olympian born of both death and divine endurance, the son of fire and ruin. Semele never held her child, never saw the temples built in his name, or the women who would dance wildly under his spell. Her love for Zeus gave rise to joy, to frenzy, to transformation, but cost her everything. And yet some say she was granted divinity in the end, that Zeus, in memory and guilt, lifted her soul from the ashes and placed her among the stars as Thyone, a lesser goddess who watches over Dionysian rites. But the scent of pomegranates never returned to her garden, and the fire that consumed her still glows in the story of every mortal who dares to love a god. Long before the shrines were raised and long after the earth had cooled from its ancient wars, there lived a woman whose name echoed softly in the forgotten spaces of myth, Alcmene. A mortal, yes, but not ordinary. She was born of royal blood, descended from Perseus himself, a woman of virtue so unwavering that even the Olympians took pause. Alcmene lived in Terrans, a city of towering walls and slow-burning torches. Her beauty was not of the violent kind that shook kingdoms or turned hearts to stone. It was dignified, tempered with kindness, steadied by wisdom. She was betrothed to Amphitryon, a noble man, brave and devoted. But war kept him from her arms, and his absence became the doorway through which fate would enter. On the night Amphitryon was to return, Alcmene waited in her chamber, her hair unbound, her hands clasped in anticipation. The torches flickered with unusual steadiness. Outside, the moon hung low, watching. And then he came. He looked like Amphitryon, spoke like him, touched her cheek with the same calloused fingers. But there was a stillness in him, too perfect to be human. His eyes, though loving, held the weight of storms not yet unleashed, and the night stretched longer than it should have, as though time itself had bent to his will. For Zeus had disguised himself once again, this time not in feathers or flame, but in flesh. Perfect, copied, deceptive. Alcmene, believing her husband had returned, welcomed him with full heart and open arms. She asked of the battle, and he spoke of victories that had not yet occurred. She wept with joy, and he held her as only gods can, completely, tragically, inevitably. By the time the real Amphitryon arrived the next day, triumphantly announcing the end of the campaign, confusion unfurled in the household. Alcmene's smile faltered. Her questions fell strangely. Her voice shook with unease. But then came the signs. Her womb stirred with unnatural power. The seers were summoned. The oracles trembled. They spoke of a child not born of mortal strength, but of celestial fire. One who would bring ruin and glory, madness and justice. A son of thunder, a demigod. Alcmene, terrified, bore her burden with quiet resilience. She hid her fear behind veils and prayer. The child grew inside her like a secret too heavy to hold. But Hera had heard, always Hera heard. She, who had endured countless betrayals, looked upon this new affront with cold fury. But she did not strike Alcmene down, not directly. Instead, she twisted time itself. As the moment of labor neared, Hera descended and tied the threads of birth, binding them in delay. Alcmene's agony began, and yet the child would not come. Hours passed, then days. She cried out to the gods, her voice breaking the silence of the stars. It was then that another goddess, Lucina, the bringer of childbirth, came to her aid, though not as an ally, but as Hera's agent. She sat outside the birthing chamber with hands clasped tightly, chanting spells to keep the child imprisoned within the womb. But the chambermaid, a woman named Galanthus, saw the trap. Cunning and brave, she rushed into the room laughing. "Rejoice," she cried. "The child is born. Zeus has triumphed again." Lucina, startled, dropped her clasp. The spell broke, and in that instant, with a scream that echoed through all of Tyrans, Alcmene gave birth. The child came into the world not with a cry, but a roar. Hercules, Heracles in the old tongue, meaning glory of Hera, a cruel irony etched into his name by the very god who had orchestrated it all. From the moment he breathed, his strength was undeniable. He crushed serpents sent to his crib. He walked early, spoke with clarity beyond his years, and wielded joy like a sword. Yet his life would be marked by trial after trial, many of them born not of fate, but of Hera's enduring wrath. As for Alcmene, she loved her son fiercely, though she always feared for him. She knew the weight he would carry, the task that would break and rebuild him. She had not chosen a god. She had not prayed for a hero. She had simply opened her door to the man she thought she loved. Zeus never returned to her. His role was done. The child was born. Another story begun. But Alcmene never forgot the trick. The long night, the doubled identity of the man who smiled with her husband's face and spoke with a stranger's thunder. And even in her later years, as she watched Hercules wrestle lions and lift mountains, she never spoke of that night. Not because she was ashamed, but because some truths once uttered fracture the world too deeply to mend. She lived long, longer than most, and when she passed, the gods lifted her soul gently. Some say to the Isles of the Blessed, others to a quiet corner of Olympus, a reward not for love, but for endurance. Alcmene's tale is not told with fire or wings. It is told in whispers, in the steady hands of a mother who bore the child of deceit and chose to raise him not in bitterness, but in strength. And sometimes that is the bravest love of all. In the ancient land of Boeotia, nestled between the green-browed hills and wind-swept plains, there was once a city called Orchomenus. Its towers gleamed under Helios's watchful eye, and its temples offered praise to gods old and proud. Among its noble women lived one whose name would echo down corridors of myth not for her deeds, but for her undoing. Her name was Antiope. She was not born a queen. She was the daughter of Nyctius, a ruler whose kingdom was fractured, forever in tension with the gods that moved unseen above. Antiope grew beneath marbled porticos and fig trees heavy with fruit, her beauty unfolding slowly, unassumingly, like the breath of dawn across still waters. But beauty never went unnoticed by Zeus. He came to her not as a suitor cloaked in finery or a whisper in dreams, but as a satyr. Yes, a creature half man, half goat, with wild eyes and laughter that belonged to mountain winds. It was not his first deception, nor would it be his last. But in this form, he approached her on a night thick with cicada song, under stars that pulsed like quiet warnings. The story varies, as they often do. Some say he charmed her, others say he took her. Either way, the union was not one of love but of collision, of a god's desire clashing with a mortal's path, bending it into something unrecognizable. Antiope fled afterward, not from guilt, but from the storm she sensed growing in the shadows of her city. Her father, shamed and enraged by the whispers surrounding his daughter, could not bear the weight of dishonor. He took his own life, leaving the kingdom to his brother Lycus, who in turn gave Antiope over to his cruel wife, Dirce. But before her capture, before her shame could be shackled, Antiope gave birth to twin sons, Amphion and Zethus. She left them on a lonely mountainside, weeping with sorrow, but hoping the gods might pity them. And the gods, strangely, did. The twins survived, nurtured by shepherds and wilderness, growing into strong, fierce young men, unaware of their divine origin. Meanwhile, Antiope's life descended into torment. Dirce was merciless. She locked her in chains, stripped her of dignity, forced her to sleep on cold stone floors. Years passed. Antiope endured, not with fire, but with a quiet and smoldering will, the kind that does not break even as it bends. She whispered to the stars, to her absent sons, to a god who had long since moved on. Then one day the chains loosened. Whether by fate or the god's design, Antiope escaped. Ragged and trembling, she fled into the wilderness. She ran with the desperation of one who has tasted every shade of cruelty and still clung to a sliver of belief that something softer might remain in the world. She stumbled upon a farm, quiet, unassuming, and there, among sheep and olive trees, were Amphion and Zethus. She did not recognize them, not truly. They were grown now, taller than the stories she had whispered into the wind. But something in their faces, a curve of the jaw, a glint in the eyes, held her gaze. They too did not know her. But as she fell before them sobbing, telling them the story of her shame, her pain, her lost sons, something awakened within them. A memory they had never known they carried. A name spoken in dreams. A mother's lullaby without words. Rage took hold. They stormed the palace. Not as princes or heroes, but as retribution given flesh. They seized Dirce and dragged her to the woods. There they bound her to a wild bull, its horns curved like the moon in judgment. And as the beast tore through the forest, Dirce's screams echoed, swallowed only by the silence that followed. Antiope, freed at last, stood with her sons, no longer abandoned, no longer alone. But joy does not always follow justice. Though the twins rose to power, building the walls of Thebes with divine music and mortal strength, Antiope's heart remained a quiet place. She had been touched by a god, yes, but not in wonder, in ruin. She bore sons not of love, but of aftermath. Zeus never returned to her, never claimed the twins, never lifted the weight of what he had done. And so, when Antiope finally faded from the world, it was without temples, without songs. Her name would survive only in the margins of others' glories, in her son's vowed fortresses, in the death of her tormentor, in the shadowed footnotes of Zeus's conquests. But some say that when the wind moves through the reeds near the banks of Lake Copais, it hums her name. Not with grief, but with resilience. A woman who survived not by divine favor, but by endurance. Not by power, but by persistence. Antiope was never a goddess, but she knew what it meant to carry the child of one and to live through the silence he left behind. In the far north of Greece, where the mountains rise like old gods in slumber and the mists coil along the streams with a mind of their own, there once stood a kingdom cloaked in snow and quiet dignity. It was called Dodona, a land known not for its armies nor its riches, but for its sacred grove, the oldest oracle where the voice of Zeus himself whispered through rustling oak leaves. And within that solemn kingdom lived a woman named Niobe. But this is not her tale, not yet. For before her sorrow, there was a story buried deeper, older, softer, a story of a woman named Aegina. She was a nymph, daughter of the river god Asopus, and her presence was like that of spring's first bloom, fragile, elusive, but unforgettable. She did not seek the world beyond the waters where she danced. Her days were spent among reeds and lilies, her laughter blending with the murmur of streams. She was, in many ways, untouched by ambition, and then Zeus saw her. He watched her in the way a shadow watches the flame, slowly, with growing desire. He desired not her realm or her crown, for she had neither. He desired the way she moved when she thought herself alone, the tilt of her head when the wind kissed her cheek, the ease with which she belonged to the world without needing to rule it. He descended not in disguise this time, but in force. The sky darkened without warning. The river froze at its edges. The birds fell silent. And in that sudden hush, he swept down and seized her. He did not ask, he did not speak, he simply took. Zeus carried Aegina far from her home, across the skies and into an island unnamed, hidden in the Saronic Gulf. It was lush, untouched, distant from the gossip of Olympus or the watching eyes of jealous gods. There he held her, and there she bore him a son, Aeacus. But back along the riverbank of her birth, Asopus raged. He searched the corners of the world, calling for his daughter with a father's fury. The sea answered in silence. The trees would not speak. Only the winds, afraid to lie, whispered of a god with lightning in his blood and hunger in his hands. Asopus confronted Zeus. What followed was not a battle, but a reckoning. Zeus, with thunder at his back, hurled bolts into the ground, scorching valleys and boiling rivers. Asopus, heartbroken and powerless against such might, retreated into sorrow, cursing the skies for stealing what was never theirs to take. Back on the island, Aegina raised her child alone. Aeacus grew quickly, half divine, half wounded. He had the bearing of a king and the silence of one born from grief. Aegina, though surrounded by beauty, could not forget the loss of her home, the theft of her freedom, the eyes of a god who had never seen her truly. In time, the island was named after her, Aegina, a bitter honor, a beautiful prison. But even paradise can wither. A plague came, sweeping through the island like smoke with teeth. Men, women, children, all fell. Aegina stood helpless as her people collapsed. She begged the heavens for mercy. None came. It was Aeacus who prayed with fury in his voice, cursing his father for silence, challenging him for once to offer more than desire and disappearance. And in rare, shuddering pity, Zeus listened. He turned the ants of the island, the small, tireless creatures that had survived, into men. A new people, born from earth and will. They were called the Myrmidons, and they thrived under Aeacus' rule. But even this gift could not cleanse the wound. Aegina had been taken. She had been hidden. She had been replaced by silence and duty. Though her name lived on in cities, in ships, in songs sung to the sea, she herself remained a whisper, a woman remembered only as a mother and an island, never as the girl who once danced barefoot in the shallows of her father's stream. Zeus never returned to her. Perhaps he believed he had given her enough, a son, a kingdom, a name. But names are not healing, and sons do not erase sorrow, and gods, for all their power, are rarely called to account. So Ajana watched her people rebuild. She stood at the edge of the island that bore her name and let the waves kiss her feet, imagining the river that once carried her laughter. She never returned to Asopus. She never saw the oaks of Dodona again. But when the wind blows through the reeds of that island, some say you can still hear her, half river, half memory. Not a queen, not a goddess, just a girl who was taken and made into a myth. In the sun-drenched fields of Crete, where olive trees twist like ancient dancers and the mountains cast long shadows across golden plains, a woman once lived whose story has long been buried beneath the thunder of her son's name. Her name was Europa. She was a princess of Phoenicia, daughter of King Agenor and Queen Telephassa. Her homeland was Tyre, a city of sea and stone, where waves spoke the language of traders and sailors, and the wind smelled of foreign spices. Europa was raised with the poise of a royal and the laughter of a girl untouched by the weight of prophecy. Her days were spent among her maidens, weaving garlands of lotus flowers, chasing birds along the shore, and singing to the sea without ever suspecting it might sing back. One morning, as Helios began his golden climb, Europa walked to the edge of the surf. Her basket was full of blooming crocus, her eyes full of sunlight, and there, grazing quietly among her father's cattle, was a bull. But this was no ordinary beast. Its coat was purest white, as if carved from moonlight. Its horns curled with perfect symmetry, gleaming like ivory touched by the gods. Its eyes, dark and bottomless, held no hint of animal instinct, only calm, patient intelligence. It approached her not with fear or frenzy, but with reverence. Europa laughed, thinking it tame. She reached out her hand, and it bowed its head to her touch. Her maidens giggled and clapped, daring her to mount it, to ride it just a few steps across the beach. She did. The moment she settled on its back, the earth shifted. The bull leapt into the sea, hooves skimming across waves that bent and bowed beneath him. Europa screamed, but the wind swallowed her voice. Her garlands fell into the foam. Her friends, helpless and weeping, watched her vanish into the horizon, a white blur against the trembling sea. The bull was Zeus. He carried her far from her homeland, over blue depths and forgotten isles. She clung to his neck, eyes wide with fear, lips raw from salt and wind. When they reached Crete, he returned to his true form, not in splendor, but in softness. He told her he had watched her, that her laughter had stirred something in him, that she was not to be harmed, but honored. And perhaps Europa, shaken and alone, believed him. He led her into the woods, where roses bloomed out of season and birds sang melodies no lyre could mimic. There, beneath a sacred plane tree, he laid her down and whispered promises of kingdoms, of sons, of memory. From that union came 3 sons, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Sarpedon. Each would go on to shape the world in his own way. Minos, who built the labyrinth, Rhadamanthus, who judged the dead, Sarpedon, who fell at Troy and was mourned even by the gods. Zeus did not stay. He gave her a new husband, Asterion, king of Crete, who raised her sons as his own and ruled with quiet dignity. Europa became queen, not of Phoenicia, but of a foreign land that still echoed with her name. The island embraced her. Statues were carved in her likeness, temples raised. She was praised not only as a queen, but as a goddess in time. The continent itself would come to bear her name, Europa. But glory does not fill the quiet ache of displacement. At night, she walked the cliffs above the sea, listening for the rhythm of Tyrian waves, hoping to hear the voices of her brothers who had scoured the world in search of her. She never saw them again, nor did she ever return to her homeland. And in the quiet moments when the court was silent and her sons were dreaming, she wondered if it had truly been honor or merely theft clothed in gentleness. Zeus had taken her with grandeur, with spectacle, but she had not chosen. That truth lived like a thorn beneath her crown. Still, she ruled wisely, raised her sons with steel and tenderness, taught them the names of the stars and the weight of mercy. She became more than a victim, more than a myth. She became a force in her own right, shaping generations through the strength of her will. Yet the story always begins with the bull. Europa and the bull, painted on urns, etched in marble, whispered in the wind, not as a warning, but as a wonder. As if her abduction were a romance, as if her silence meant acceptance. But beneath those myths lived a woman who once picked flowers by the sea, who screamed into the waves, who found herself upon a throne she never asked for. a woman whose name was written across a continent, but whose heart remained tethered to a shoreline she never saw again. On the edge of Thessaly, where mist clings to the earth like the breath of sleeping giants, and twilight lingers just a moment longer than it should, there lived a princess known not for her beauty, but for her sorrow. Her name was Io. She had once been a priestess of Hera, chaste and devout. Her days spent tending the goddess's altars, and her nights bathed in the blue shadows of sacred dreams. Io had the kind of presence that didn't command, but calmed. She moved through the marble halls of Argos like a hush, her steps light and her gaze always lowered in reverence. She asked nothing of the gods but to serve them well, and that, perhaps, was why Zeus noticed her. He watched from the clouds with a hunger sharpened by silence. He saw the quiet curve of her hands as she lit incense, the way her prayers rose into the air with perfect stillness. She did not seek the sky's attention, and that made her irresistible. He came to her first in dreams, soft, unformed visions that stirred her sleep and left her breathless in the morning. Then in whispers on the wind, a warmth in the air when she was alone, a presence, a promise. Io, afraid, confided in her father, the river god Inachus. He prayed to the oracle for guidance, and the answer he received was a warning wrapped in riddles. Drive her from the house, or suffer the ruin of all. Heartbroken, he obeyed, and so Io wandered. Zeus found her not in temples or courts, but in the open plain beneath the bare eye of the sun. He descended not as beast or bird, but as a thick, luminous cloud curling around her like mist made sentient, and within it he embraced her. But his secrecy was not enough. Hera knew. Hera always knew. Descending in a chariot of air, she arrived before Zeus could retreat. The cloud dissipated under her gaze, and Zeus, scrambling to conceal his betrayal, transformed Io on the spot into a snow-white heifer, not a graceful deer, not a nightingale, but a cow, silent, powerless, eyes wide with horror. Hera, smiling coolly, asked Zeus if he might gift her this lovely animal. He could not refuse, and so Hera placed Io in the care of Argus Panoptes, the 100-eyed giant who never fully slept. Wherever Io wandered, she was watched, by a gaze that saw always, by chains of vigilance and divine suspicion. She grazed alone in moonlit fields, crying silent tears that no one could understand. Her voice, once filled with song and prayer, was gone, replaced by low, aching moans. The grass was sweet, but her soul was withering. Zeus, guilt-ridden, sent Hermes to free her. The messenger god played his flute beneath the trees, a tune slow and hypnotic. One by one, the eyes of Argus closed, lulled by melody into surrender. When the last eyelid fell, Hermes struck, killing the sentinel. Hera, enraged but unyielding, did not let Io go. She sent a gadfly, a tiny, stinging torment that buzzed endlessly at Io's heels, driving her into exile. And so the white heifer fled across the known world. She crossed the Ionian Sea, giving it her name. She galloped through Illyria, across the plains of Scythia, over the desert sands of Arabia, her hooves cutting paths through lands that had not yet dreamed of gods. She wandered until the edges of the world blurred, until exhaustion threatened to consume what was left of her mind. Finally, in Egypt, she collapsed. And there something shifted. The gods took pity, or perhaps they tired of the cruelty. Zeus descended one final time and touched her brow, restoring her human form. But even then, she did not return to Greece. She remained in Egypt, where she bore Zeus a son, Epaphus, who would go on to be revered by pharaohs. In time, she was woven into Egyptian myth, known as a goddess of motherhood, a queen whose pain had sanctified her path. Yet behind the stories, behind the temples and offerings, there lived the memory of a girl who had once tended the sacred fires of Hera with devotion so pure it might have lasted a lifetime, had it not been seen by a god who could not bear to let her be. Io's tale is one of transformation, not just in form, but in soul. She became a wanderer, a ghost beneath her own skin, a figure painted not in colors, but in longing. And though she was eventually restored, nothing was truly returned. For there are wounds that no divine touch can heal, and silences that stretch across oceans, carrying the ache of a name once spoken in prayer, now lost in wind. In the green-shadowed reaches of Arcadia, where wild boars rustled the underbrush and shepherds played reed pipes in solitude, a maiden once wandered alone, barefoot, unclaimed, and fierce as the hills that cradled her birth. Her name was Taygete, one of the Pleiades, daughters of Atlas and Pleione, born beneath the early shimmer of stars and destined to become a part of the sky. She lived for freedom, not for company. Unlike her sisters, who sometimes gathered by the lakes or danced in clearings at twilight, Taygete often vanished into the higher slopes of Mount Taygetus, her namesake. She slept beneath pines and bathed in waterfalls no trail had touched. The wind carried her scent like a secret, and the mountains themselves leaned closer when she passed. Zeus noticed her not in court or temple, but in the silent moment between bird calls, when she paused to drink from a spring. She was not adorned in garlands or veils. She wore a hunter's wrap and carried a bow taller than herself. There was nothing submissive about her, nothing waiting to be claimed. Perhaps that was what stirred him. He pursued not in haste, but in the way of old gods, slow, assured, inevitable. He watched her from the clouds, from the darkened branches. She sensed him, not as a shape or voice, but as a presence always too near. Her steps grew warier, her eyes sharper. Taygete was not naive. She had heard stories of other women, nymphs and mortals alike, whose lives unraveled under the weight of divine desire. She feared not love, but the loss of her name, her will, herself. And so she ran, not from a beast or a storm, but from something more enduring, the attention of a god. She climbed to the highest cliffs to places no footprints lingered, where even hawks did not nest. There she begged Artemis for protection. The virgin goddess of the hunt, twin of Apollo, heard her plea, and with a gesture she cloaked Taygete in invisibility, not from mortals, but from the gods themselves. Zeus raged. He scoured the land, sent omens to oracles, stirred the winds, but Taygete was gone from his sight. In time, he turned elsewhere. His longing, like all divine storms, moved on to a new shore. But Taygete did not rejoice. The isolation became a second prison. She wandered, unseen and untouched, her voice echoing back to her alone. Even the birds forgot her. Even the stars seemed to look past her. In fleeing violation, she had stepped into a kind of living death. Still, Artemis watched over her. In time, the goddess brought her back into the world, changed but safe. Taygete reemerged not in palaces but in caves and wooded glens, and yet the world had not forgotten her. Whispers of her return stirred among dryads and shepherds. Her beauty, they said, had become even more spectral, as though she no longer entirely belonged to Earth. But freedom is not without scars. In some versions, the story darkens. They say that before Artemis could reach her, Zeus did find Taygete, that he came to her in disguise and took what he wished, that the son she bore, Lacedaemon, future king and founder of Sparta, was not the fruit of love, but of a god's trespass. In this telling, Taygete fled to Mount Taygetus, not only in fear, but in shame. There, broken by the memory, she threw herself from a cliff, her body swallowed by stone and root. Artemis, in grief and rage, lifted her spirit into the stars, joining her sisters in the sky. Thus the Pleiades came to shine above us, 7 stars born of 7 women, each with a different sorrow. But Taygete's spark flickers faintly, sometimes lost to the naked eye, as though her voice has chosen silence even in the heavens. Others say she lived long and raised her son in solitude, speaking to him of dignity, of the danger of power left unchecked, of the fine line between reverence and ruin. No version ends in peace. Whether taken or spared, whether mother or martyr, Taygete remains a symbol of resistance cloaked in myth. Her legacy is not written in victory or vengeance, but in refusal, in the quiet assertion that not all beauty seeks a gaze, and not all stories need an ending to remain. Even now, when the constellation of the Pleiades wheels across the winter sky, her star is the one you may miss if you blink, the one hiding just behind the others, still running, still watching, still choosing her silence over submission. In the dusky realm of Boeotia, where rivers run slow and heavy through reed-fringed banks and the fog clings to trees like old memories, there once lived a girl named Leto. She was not born to be hunted. She was not born to be feared. But in time, that is what she became. Leto was a Titaness, daughter of Cuius and Phoebe, born in the time before the gods of Olympus claimed their thrones. She was gentle by nature, still, composed, quiet in her reverence. While others sought dominion or vengeance, Leto wandered beneath the moonlight, a solitary figure humming ancient songs beneath laurel trees. She caught the eye of Zeus not in the heat of battle or during some grand display of devotion. He found her in a meadow at twilight, where the sky was still bleeding color into the earth, and the air smelled of lavender and dusk. She was kneeling by a pool, fingers trailing the surface, her reflection blurred by ripples. Zeus approached with something rare in his stride, patience. He did not descend in the form of thunder or beast, nor did he cloak himself in trickery. He simply sat beside her and spoke. Leto did not recoil. She listened. The stories do not dwell on their courtship. There are no vivid battles or swooning songs. There was only stillness and a god drawn to it. Some say she loved him. Others say she submitted out of necessity. But in the end, she bore his children, twins, and it was then that peace abandoned her. Hera, who had borne Zeus's countless betrayals in silence, who had witnessed the births of too many children not her own, reached a breaking point. But her vengeance did not fall upon her husband. It fell upon the woman carrying his unborn seed. Leto became a fugitive. No land would accept her. No city, no island, no mountain dared defy Hera's curse. Wherever Leto wandered, heavy with life, her ankles swollen, her breath shallow, doors were closed, temples turned her away, fields went silent at her approach. She became a shadow, a hunted thing, a mother with nowhere to give birth. In her desperation, she wandered for months, across sunlit plains and treacherous cliffs, across forests where even the animals turned away. The pain of labor began in the wilderness, far from aid, far from comfort. Her cries echoed against stone, unheard by mortals, ignored by gods. At last, she reached a floating island, Delos. It was not a true island then, but a drifting rock, untethered to earth or sea. It had no allegiance, no temple, no ruler. It was too small, too unimportant to earn Hera's notice. And so there Leto collapsed, wrapping herself in a cloak of leaves and prayers. The earth quivered, the sky turned gold. And there, in pain and solitude, she gave birth first to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, of the moon, of wildness and female solitude. The child emerged without a sound, as if born already knowing the world's cruelty. Artemis, only moments old, rose and helped deliver her twin brother, Apollo. 2 children, one radiant like fire, the other cool as silver. Delos, once barren and drifting, bloomed in an instant. The island anchored itself to the seafloor, becoming sacred, a sanctuary to both gods and mortals. But Leto, though now a mother of gods, did not rejoice. She had been humiliated, shunned, made to crawl through the dust of the world while her lover sat in Olympus, unbothered. She raised her children in silence. She watched them grow. Artemis, who would never marry, who would protect women from the very fate her mother endured. And Apollo, who would carry fire in his veins, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Yet Leto never reclaimed a throne. She never returned to Olympus in triumph. Her name became a footnote in the stories of her children, a vessel, a mother, forgotten, but not always. One day, long after her children had become pillars of the pantheon, Leto wandered into the city of Lycia. There she tried to drink from a river, parched from travel. But the local peasants, jealous or ignorant or simply cruel, dirtied the water, stirring mud and filth into it so she could not quench her thirst. Leto stood in silence, watching them. And then with a voice low and ancient, she cursed them. Their limbs grew stiff. Their skin thickened. Their mouths opened in silent croaks. One by one, they transformed into frogs, forever condemned to the muddy waters they had made unclean. It was one of the few acts of vengeance she allowed herself. Not because she lacked the power, but because she understood the weight of it. Leto's strength had always been survival, not violence. She endured where others would have crumbled. She gave life when the world gave her exile. And so, when her name is whispered, if it is whispered, it is with a kind of quiet reverence. Not for what she conquered, but for what she bore. A goddess made not of fire or thunder, but of the long, aching silence that follows betrayal. A woman whose womb carried both the moon and the sun, while she herself was left to wander in shadow. And even now, when the sun rises and the moon waits, suspended in the hush of dawn, they remember her. Not as a lover, not even as a mother, but as the one who carried them into a world that had no place for her. Beyond the bustling lands of Hellas, across the churning Aegean and into the mountains of Caria, there lived a princess whose fate was tangled not in prophecy or power, but in love that was slow and pure until it wasn't. Her name was Mnemosyne, and though her story is rarely told as one of Zeus's lovers, it is perhaps one of the most haunting. She was no maiden wandering through forests, nor a victim of chance encounter. Mnemosyne was a titaness, born of Gaia and Uranus, older than Olympus itself. She was memory incarnate, the essence of recall, of song, of the thread that binds past to present. Mortals offered her prayers when they sought to remember the name of a lost child or the notes of a song passed down through generations. Poets whispered to her before dipping their pens. Oracles honored her before uttering truths. Mnemosyne lived not in temples, but in quiet caves and shadowed groves. She did not demand worship. She simply waited, her presence gentle and enduring, like the feeling of déjà vu or a forgotten word perched just behind your teeth. Zeus did not seek her for beauty, though she had that too, in the way of riverbanks and worn parchment. He sought her for what he could not possess elsewhere, understanding. After his war with the Titans, after the birth of Olympus and the coronation of a new divine order, Zeus found himself unsettled. Victorious, yes, but uneasy. Something pulsed beneath his triumph, an ache, a void, a question he could not name. He came to Mnemosyne not in thunder but as a wanderer, a man cloaked in thought, a god shedding his symbols. He asked her not for pleasure but for stories, for meaning, and she answered. For 9 nights he stayed with her, not in fire or frenzy but in soft conversation. They lay beneath the stars as she recited the histories of the cosmos, not just the wars and births, but the forgotten names of rivers, the laughter of extinct birds, the last song sung before cities fell. Zeus listened, hungry, as though her voice filled something long hollow in him. He did not press her. He did not disguise himself. And she, perhaps weary from centuries of solitude, opened her heart not to his title, but to his silence. From their union were born the Muses, 9 daughters who would inspire every art known to mankind. Calliope for epic poetry, Clio for history, Erato for love songs, Thalia for comedy, and others, each a thread spun from Mnemosyne's own soul. She did not raise them on Olympus. She kept them near, in the quiet woods of Mount Helicon and the sacred springs of Pieria. The Muses grew not with grandeur, but with grace. They whispered to the minds of mortals, guiding brushstrokes, melodies, verses, and dreams. They carried their mother's essence, the power to recall not only facts, but feeling. But after those 9 nights, Zeus left. He returned to Olympus, to his thunderbolts and throne, to the weight of divinity. He did not return to Mnemosyne. Their parting held no bitterness, no promise either, only the soft ache of something finite. Mnemosyne did not cry. She returned to her cave, where names danced on the walls like fireflies. She did not mourn a lost love, only the inevitable forgetting that followed. For she was memory. She knew that even the gods would one day be shadows in song, their thunder traded for whispers. Sometimes poets stood at the mouth of her cave and wept, not knowing why. Sometimes travelers dreamt of her face unclear, but her voice familiar. She lived not in mythic tragedy, but in every moment someone reached backward to remember what had once been cherished. And Zeus, perhaps in his quietest hours when the stars flickered like fading words, he thought of her, not with regret, but with longing. For she was the only one who never asked him for anything, the only one who gave him daughters who would speak not to Olympus, but to humankind. Mnemosyne was not stolen or tricked or broken. She was not silenced. Her story is quieter than the others. Yes, but deeper, for it is she who teaches us that the past is never truly gone. It lives in lullabies, in paintings and tears without names. And when you find yourself lost in an old song, or standing still in the scent of childhood, you are walking through her realm. You are remembering. And in that act, she lives again. High upon the slopes of Mount Ida, where the pine trees murmured secrets to the wind and wolves howled only to the stars, there dwelled a nymph who would become the root of legend and legacy, though her own name would one day be obscured by the fame of her son. Her name was Elara. She was a daughter of Orchomenus, a king of men, but her blood ran close to the earth. Like many of her kind, Elara lived half in the world of mortals and half in the realm of gods, never fully belonging to either. She was quiet, thoughtful, never the first to speak, but always the last to leave the shadows of a grove, as if reluctant to part with the trees. Zeus found her in such a place. It was not lust that drew him first, it was grief. For even gods feel the weight of time, though they are not bound to it. This was not long after the fall of one of his many flames, and he wandered the world cloaked not in lightning, but in a hush of melancholy. He came across Alara as she gathered herbs beside a brook, her hair damp from the mist, her hands stained green from the plants she crushed between her fingers. He did not speak at first. He watched. And Alara, like many before her, felt the disturbance in the air before she saw him. When she looked up, he was not a god, not in form. He was a man with tired eyes and the weight of silence behind his smile. What passed between them was not urgent. There was no chase, no trickery, only a slow unfolding of conversation, and perhaps in the weeks that followed, a surrender to something neither fully understood. Alara gave herself to him not in fear, but in quiet, uncertain willingness. But when she conceived, the world changed. The child growing within her was not mortal. He was too large, too strong, even in the womb. The earth beneath her began to shake when she passed. Her breath shortened, her sleep became tormented. Zeus saw what he had done. He, who had made mountains tremble and rivers rise, had created something that could not be borne by any mortal frame. Fearing for Alara's life, he did not abandon her. For once, he sought to preserve the one he had touched. He opened the earth itself, split it with his own hand, and hid Alara deep within, placing her in a vast cavern beneath the surface of the world. There, in darkness and seclusion, she carried the child to term. Alone. No bird sang to her. No sunlight warmed her skin. Her voice, once soft and warm, grew hoarse from silence. She was buried alive, not by accident, but by a god's desperate attempt at protection. In that chamber beneath the world, she gave birth to Tityos, a giant whose size dwarfed even the cavern that held him. She did not see him grow. Some say she died in childbirth. Others claim the loneliness claimed her after. There are no songs that tell of her passing, only the echo. Tityos was taken in by Gaia, the earth herself, who nurtured the child in her roots, but he grew wild, uncontrolled. Like many children born of abandonment and rage, he sought answers through violence. He would go on to assault Leto, the gentle mother of Artemis and Apollo, in a misguided attempt to prove himself. For this, the twin gods struck him down without mercy. In the underworld, Tityos would suffer eternally, his body stretched across 9 acres, 2 vultures tearing endlessly at his liver, which regrew each night. A punishment not just for the crime, but for being born of a union that should never have been. And Alara, she became a footnote. Her name, when spoken, was wrapped around the tragedy of her son. She was not granted godhood, not worshipped. No temple bore her image, but her body became part of the earth. Her tomb transformed into a womb, her breath into the wind between stones. Some say that even now, if you find yourself standing in a hollow of Mount Ida, where the ground feels strangely warm and the trees bend low without wind, you are near the place where Alara once lay beneath the world, cradling a son too large for life, a woman buried for love, for protection, for consequence. Not all tragedies scream. Some are whispered beneath the soil, where no one listens, except the earth. There was a time before iron and fire, before the roar of city-states and the carved marble faces of kings, when the sea itself held stories in its tide, and the wind carried more than salt. In that time, on the island of Kos, there lived a woman named Himalaya, an ocean nymph born of foam and tide, quiet as moonlight reflected on still water. She did not dwell in palaces or temples. She was not a queen, nor a goddess of high renown. Her realm was simpler, groves of olive trees that bent toward the sea, shallow streams that wound lazily to the shore, and mornings spent gathering figs with damp fingers while the world slowly unfurled around her. Zeus saw her not during a hunt or a battle, but in the small stillness between storms. He had wandered to the edge of Kos after the defeat of the Titans, heavy with thought and wearied from the burden of rule. The island, remote and unspoiled, offered silence, solace, and there she was, Himalaya, wading through a tide pool, humming a song older than Olympus itself, her back to him, her hands gathering driftwood. She did not startle when he approached. Perhaps she already knew, or perhaps she mistook him for a fisherman, another shadow on the shore. Zeus did not speak of thrones or thunder. He introduced himself without divinity. No glowing aura, no display of lightning, just a man, lonely and curious. For once, there was no deception, no transformation, no conquest in disguise. He sat beside her day after day as the waves whispered between them. He listened more than he spoke. And she, perhaps sensing that this god was, at least for a time, unarmed, offered him nothing but her presence. Their union was quiet, absent of spectacle. It did not shake the earth or ripple the sky. It was like dew gathering on stone, inevitable, gentle, unremarkable to those who passed by, yet deeply felt by those who dwelled within it. Himalaya bore him 3 sons, Spartaeus, Cronius, and Cytus. The world remembers little of them. They did not found empires or slay monsters. They were not caught in the gears of Olympus or etched into marble. But they were strong and just, and they ruled the island of Kos with fairness, their mother's grace tempering their father's might. Yet even this peace, born in stillness, could not escape the jealousy of Hera. Though Himalaya had never challenged her, never sought glory or provocation, Hera's gaze eventually turned toward the nymph who had held her husband's heart, even for a moment. One version of the story says that as Himalaya's sons grew into manhood, they set sail from Kos to reach the wider world. Hera, filled with spite, cast madness upon their ship, driving it from the sea into the rocky cliffs of Rhodes. Others say she cursed the waters around Kos, so no son of Himalaya could ever cross beyond it, binding them to their mother's shores like forgotten birds in a broken cage. And so Himalaya, once kissed by gods and tied alike, grew old on the island. Zeus never returned. He left no temple in her name, no constellation, no gift to mark what had passed. Only sons, a memory, and the echo of footsteps once left in wet sand. Yet Himalaya did not mourn as others might have. She remained rooted. Her life was never meant to be sung in the high halls of Olympus. She was a woman of salt and stone, of early morning sun and the quiet labor of love. And when the people of Kos whispered her name, it was with reverence. Not because she had betted a god, but because she had remained herself through it all. Now, when waves lap softly at the shores of Kos and the morning fog slips across the island like a dream not yet forgotten, the old women say, Himalaya walks there still. Barefoot, humming, gathering driftwood, not waiting, simply being, as she always had, in the thick forests of Thessaly, where the branches wove into one another like threads in a forgotten tapestry, and the ground pulsed with the slow breath of the earth, there lived a woman named Dia. Her name, meaning divine, was a quiet echo of the path her life would take, not toward glory, but toward entanglement with the gods. She was the daughter of Dionysus, a proud king whose court smelled of pine, resin, and smoke, and whose halls were built more for the whisper of strategy than the music of celebration. Dia was raised with purpose, not to sing or charm, but to endure. She learned the names of every herb in the wood, how to carve meat from bone without waste, and how to speak only when her words would settle, not stir. When she was of age, she was given in marriage to Ixion. Ixion was a man of fire and pride, bold, reckless, a hunter of glories. He was not born to royalty, but earned it through force and cunning, and in marrying Dia, he hoped to seal his place in the fabric of power. But their union was not forged of affection. Ixion wanted status. Dia became the key, and in that exchange she was silenced. The marriage was cold. She bore him a son, Pirithous, who would one day challenge gods and walk the knife's edge between honor and doom. But in her own life, Dia found no peace. Ixion in time would betray her father, murdering Dionysus to avoid paying the promised bride price. The fire in his chest had grown into a hunger that devoured even kin. Zeus, observing this, at first saw Ixion as a man who needed chastising. But when he looked more closely, his gaze did not stay on the husband. It lingered on the wife. Dia, who bore her grief like polished stone. Dia, who walked through the woods with hands open to the wind. Dia, who did not shout or mourn where others would, but simply withdrew deeper into herself. Zeus descended in one of his oldest, cruelest disguises, not as a bull or eagle or golden mist, but as the very man she had married, Ixion. The deception was perfect. His voice, his stride, the way he held his hand at his side, always slightly curled from an old wound. He came to her in the night, in the place where she had resigned herself to duty, and he touched her in the darkness. And Dia, already bruised by a life of silences and bargains, accepted him. From that false union, she conceived another son, though it would be many years before the truth of his father would become known. Zeus, in his duplicity, sought to test Ixion further. He invited the man to Olympus, to dine among the immortals, a rare and dangerous gift. And there, even in the halls of the gods, Ixion proved himself unworthy. Drunk with hubris, he tried to seduce Hera herself, but she, ever prepared, substituted a cloud in her likeness, letting him betray his intentions without touching her. Zeus watched and judged. The punishment came swift and eternal. Ixion was bound to a wheel of fire, forever spinning in the void of Tartarus, his body never allowed to rest, his soul never allowed to forget. But Dia remained. She did not weep for her husband. She did not rejoice in his fall. She lived as she had always lived, in the shadow of other people's choices in the still corners of myth. And the son she bore, named Pirithous, grew wild and restless, taking after both the mortal ambition of Ixion and the celestial fire of Zeus. He would go on to steal Helen before the Trojan War, to descend into the underworld with Theseus, to seek what no man was meant to grasp. His life would be filled with the noise that had always surrounded his mother, but he would never know the fullness of her story, because Dia never told it. She remained in Thessaly, in the forest that had shaped her, walking paths no longer marked, tending altars no longer visited. Her name lived only in fragments, in the footnotes of greater men's epics. But the truth of her life was carved in stillness. A woman born to endure kings and gods, who bore 2 sons to 2 men, one of blood, one of thunder, without ever being given the choice to refuse either. And sometimes in the quiet of night, when the wind rustles too suddenly through the leaves, the elders of Thessaly still murmur her name, not as a goddess, not as a lover, but as the woman who remained. In the fertile plains of Thea, where orchards breathed out sweetness and the rivers sang even in drought, there once lived a sea nymph who walked the boundary between saltwater and starlight. Her name was Thetis. Of all the lovers tied to Zeus by fate, will, or accident, Thetis was different. She was not merely desired, she was feared. Not for her wrath or cunning, but for what was whispered in the chambers of oracles and written into the hush of prophecy. It was said that Thetis would bear a son greater than his father, and for a god like Zeus, whose rule was built atop the ashes of his own father Cronus, there could be no greater warning. He had once looked upon Thetis with interest, not lust, not yearning, but something like longing. She was beautiful, yes, her skin a pale shimmer like sunlight through waves, her voice soft with the lull of deep currents, but it was her calmness that unnerved even the gods. Her silence was never submission, it was sovereignty. When she stood beside the sea, the tides leaned toward her. Zeus approached her once before the prophecy was widely known. He offered her a place among the stars, a crown fashioned from coral and lightning. She refused with a quiet bow. He asked her to dance at Olympus. She declined. When he pressed her hand, she slipped into mist. It was not defiance, not rejection. It was something deeper. Thetis had no desire for Olympus. She belonged to older things, deeper things, and the sky was not her home. But then came the prophecy that her son would surpass his father in power, in glory, in fate. It changed everything. Zeus stepped back. So did Poseidon, who had also courted her with restless tides and pearl-choked promises. They both feared what the child of a sea goddess might become if fathered by a god. So, in an act both of control and surrender, they decreed that Thetis must marry a mortal. It was not a punishment, it was containment, and so she was bound to Peleus, a mortal king of Thessaly. The gods came to the wedding, not in sorrow but celebration. It was the rare union where Olympus appeared not to seduce but to settle. Hera smiled, Apollo played the lyre, even Zeus offered blessings with the illusion of grace, but Thetis did not smile. Peleus was a good man, brave, noble, unsure, but he was not of her world, and though she allowed the union, she never gave herself fully. On their wedding night, she lay beside him like a wave that never reached the shore. In time she conceived. Her body held a child not of thunder or divine command, but of compromise. A boy, golden and fierce with something eternal behind his mortal eyes. Achilles. Even before he could walk, she saw the storm in him. She knew what he would become, what he must become, so she tried to save him. She anointed his skin with ambrosia. She burned away his mortality in secret flames. She dipped him into the river Styx, gripping him by the heel, trying to make him invulnerable to the world he was born into. But nothing can be fully spared, not even by a goddess. The heel remained. As Achilles grew, so too did the shadow of war, the war that would define him, destroy him, immortalize him. And Thetis, watching, found herself tangled in a prophecy of her own making, not as a lover or a wife, but as a mother. She begged him not to go to Troy. She offered disguises, ships, other destinies. But he went, because destiny is not a path we choose. It is a tide we ride or drown beneath. When he died, pierced in the one place she could not protect, she did not scream. She descended into silence again, deeper than before. Some say she returned to the sea and never rose again. Others believe she still watches from the depths, hair streaming like kelp, eyes dim with memory. Not of Zeus, not even of Peleus, but of her son, the boy born of a choice made by gods, shaped by fate and lost to the very glory they feared. Thetis was not conquered. She was not deceived. She was chosen, then denied. And in her quiet mourning, she became something no god could touch, a mother who outlived her child. In the damp and trembling edges of Arcadia, where fog lingers low over meadows and the trees lean in as if eavesdropping on the earth's own thoughts, there lived a woman named Callirhoe. She was a daughter of Oceanus, a water nymph whose presence rippled not just through rivers but through time, quiet and enduring. Her name meant beautiful flow, and it suited her well. There was nothing sudden about her, nothing boastful. She moved with the grace of currents, and like water, she adapted, surrendered, but never disappeared. Callirhoe did not seek Olympus. She did not sing for favor or weave wreaths for gods. She lived near a spring, deep in the woods, where deer came to drink and birds would sometimes pause their songs when she bathed. And it was there that Zeus found her. He was not hunting that day, not in the usual way. He wandered more than pursued, tired of palace quarrels and the weight of being forever watched. In the calm of the glade, the shadows cooled him. The silence beckoned, and there, through the misted reeds, he saw her, Callirhoe, kneeling at the spring, her hands cupped, her lips brushing the surface. She looked up. She did not startle. Perhaps she knew what he was. Perhaps she did not care. Zeus approached not with a god's arrogance, but with something gentler, words, not thunder. He sat beside her and asked what she was thinking. She replied that she was listening, not to him, not to the birds, but to the water beneath them. It had a rhythm, she said, a language older than the stars. He listened too. That day passed like a sigh, and he returned the next, and the one after. Their connection did not erupt like lightning. It seeped in like water into stone, quiet, steady, changing everything. Callirhoe, unlike so many before her, did not resist him, nor did she fall into him. She simply welcomed him into her solitude for as long as he would stay, and he stayed for a time. From this strange peace was born a son, Achilles. He was a river god, but more than that, a being of change, of flux, of duality. He could become a serpent or a bull, a man or a flood. He would grow into the largest of all Greek rivers, powerful and winding, impossible to pin down. Callirhoe raised him with patience, teaching him not to conquer the land but to shape it, to carry memory within his currents. She sang to him not of battles or thrones, but of roots, silt, and the quiet power of erosion. Zeus, after the birth, visited less, then stopped. There was no goodbye. There never was. Callirhoe did not weep. She was water. Loss was a familiar shape. Years passed. Achilles became known far and wide, especially when he vied for the hand of Deianira, wrestling Hercules himself and losing not by weakness but by fate. Yet even in defeat, his name flowed on. Callirhoe remained. She wandered from spring to spring, no longer bound to one place, her name carried by the mouths of those who remembered beauty, but rarely remembered the pain beneath it. She was not devoured by her story. She dissolved through it. And when mortals later built shrines to rivers, when they cast offerings into streams, it was her they honored without knowing, the one who bore a god's child without expectation, without tragedy or triumph, the one who reminded the world that surrender is not always loss. Callirhoe's tale is soft, like the mist that coats your skin before you notice. It does not roar like thunder or blaze like prophecy. It lingers. And if you sit by a quiet spring long enough and close your eyes, you may feel her beside you, listening, not to you, but to the water. In the shadowed lands of Thessaly, where hills roll gently like forgotten lullabies, and the wind carries the breath of pine and smoke, there was once a woman named Iodame. Her story, rarely told and often forgotten, lies curled like a serpent in the folds of myth, faint but no less powerful. She was a priestess sworn to the goddess Athena, keeper of ancient rites in a time before temples grew tall and stone replaced song. Iodame tended the sacred fire in a grove known only to the most devout. It was there, deep among olive trees and silence, that she met her fate, unseen, and yet shaped forever by the gods. Iodame's life was simple. She rose with the dawn, sang the morning hymns, scattered herbs upon the altar, and stood vigil as the night passed. Her hair was always tied with modest twine. Her eyes, though sharp, never lingered on vanity. She was not praised for beauty or wit, but for her constancy. She belonged to the sacred rhythm of routine. Zeus, as the tales go, did not seek her in desire. Not at first. He came to the grove in secret, cloaked in silence, not to seduce, but to see, perhaps even to listen. Iodame was alone that night, sweeping ash from the foot of Athena's statue. Her voice was low, half prayer, half lullaby. She did not hear him arrive. She did not turn when the branches shifted overhead. And Zeus, for a rare moment, hesitated. But in his presence the air thickened. The fire, once steady, flared suddenly. Sparks leapt upward, and Iodame froze. When she turned, she did not see the king of the gods in full divine form. She saw a woman, radiant and tall, eyes aglow like dawn against bronze. She saw Athena, or so she thought. For Zeus had chosen to take the guise of his daughter, the very goddess Iodame served. Whether out of cunning or cruelty, we do not know. Perhaps he thought it would lower her defenses. Perhaps he thought it was a test. Or perhaps the gods, even Zeus, did not fully understand the shape of their own disguises. What we do know is that when Iodame looked upon this vision, this Athena, she felt something she had never felt before, terror laced with wonder. And then she saw it. Upon the forehead of the figure before her, something moved. A serpent, alive, hissing, coiled like a question. It slithered across the brow, black as night, its eyes twin pinpricks of silver. Iodame gasped. She staggered back, her body trembling, and as her eyes widened, stones surged through her. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. From her feet upward, her body stiffened. Her muscles turned to marble. Her breath caught halfway in her throat. Her scream was never heard, for it never escaped her mouth. She turned to stone before the altar she had kept alight her entire life. Zeus vanished. Whether out of guilt or indifference, none can say. The grove was silent for a day, then two, then a week. Another priestess came, seeking Iodame. She found her, frozen in place, hands raised in a pose of startled reverence, eyes forever open. The locals built a shrine around her. They dared not move her. They dared not question what had occurred. They only whispered. Some said Athena herself had punished Iodame for some forgotten trespass. Others believed the serpent marked the moment when the divine revealed itself too fully to a mortal. But there were a few, very few, who whispered the darker truth, that it was Zeus, not Athena, who came that night, that he had hidden behind the face of his own daughter, that what was meant to be sacred had been profaned not by mortal sin, but by divine intrusion. And so Iodame remained, a statue, a memory. Each night at the temple, the fire was rekindled, and each morning, as part of the ritual, the priestesses would murmur, "Iodame lives," not as a blessing, not as reverence, but as warning. For in her stone stillness, she watched all who came. She bore no expression, no wrath, just endless, knowing silence. Perhaps Zeus forgot her, or perhaps he never looked away. Perhaps that was his punishment too, to be remembered not by triumphs, but by the women he turned to stone, not in death, but in remembrance. And Iodame, carved by betrayal and locked in eternity, became more than a priestess. She became a symbol, not of devotion, but of what happens when gods step where they do not belong. On the southern shores of Elis, where the river Alpheus bends like a silver ribbon and the olive groves sway as though listening to the breath of the gods, there lived a woman named Euboea. Her name meant good cattle, a humble designation in a world carved by thunder and myth. But her story, like so many of Zeus's chosen, was never truly hers to name. She was one of 3 sisters, daughters of the river god Asopus, raised in waters that ran cool even in the heat of midsummer. Euboea knew the voice of every tree, every rock, every ripple in the current. She grew not in courts or temples, but in shallows, dancing between reeds, laughing with frogs, collecting smooth stones and tying them into charms. Her beauty was not of polished mirrors or royal veils. It was the kind that belonged to dusk, quiet, natural, and dangerous to those who assumed light could be owned. Zeus watched from the clouds. Not for the first time, he turned his gaze upon the daughters of Asopus. He had already taken Aegina, then Thebe. Now his eyes fell on Euboea. She was the youngest, the most elusive, slipping through the world as if her feet were made of wind. He became obsessed not with her body, but with the way she avoided being seen. He tried to catch her attention as a swan. She ignored him. As a shepherd, wounded and leaning against a tree. She walked past, as a song in the wind, calling her name. She looked up once, but did not stop. It was then he chose to act, not with courtship, not even with deceit, but with force. He descended in full splendor, radiant, blinding, undeniable. The sky cracked open above Elis, and before Euboea could flee into the reeds, the world folded around her. The grasses bent flat, the river stilled, and she was taken. There are no verses that describe the struggle, no hymns that mourn the moment, only silence, and a few scattered stones along the banks of the river where she once knelt. When it was over, he carried her across the Aegean to the island that now bears her name, Euboea. There he left her, alone, changed, heavy with a child who would bear the burden of being born from divine obsession. The locals took her in, perhaps out of pity, perhaps out of fear. She gave birth to a son, likely Hero, or in other accounts, a lesser-known demigod whose name faded from the records of men. The child was strong, but silent, much like his mother. Euboea never returned to Elis. She never saw her sisters again. Her father Asopus searched the lands and seas, but he had grown weary after losing so many daughters. One by one, the gods plucked them from his riverbanks, and his grief deepened into rage. But Euboea did not rage. She raised her child on the edge of the sea, speaking little, smiling rarely. At night, she would walk the stony beach, casting the charms she had once tied as a girl into the waves, each one a name, a prayer, a memory she could no longer carry. And over time, the people forgot her story. They remembered the island, of course, its fertile lands, its soft winds, but not the woman for whom it was named, not the daughter of the river who was stolen by the sky. Zeus never looked back. He had no need to. But the island remembered. Its hills whisper in the evening. Its shores sing in strange tones when the tide recedes. And in the corners of the island where no roads reach, some say you can still hear a soft voice, murmuring to the sea, calling out names long swallowed by salt, not for vengeance, not even for return, only for the sake of not forgetting. Far to the north, beyond the familiar warmth of the Peloponnesian sun, where the land grew rugged and cold, mists clung to the ankles of hills like memory made visible, there lived a woman named Pluto. Her name meant wealth, though she possessed none of the kind mortals typically counted. She had no gold, no lands, no suitors bearing gifts. But she was rich in solitude, in silence, and in a kind of raw, enduring grace that made others pause when she passed. She did not seek admiration. She sought only the company of still things, stones warmed by morning light, birch trees shifting in unison, rivers that refused to be hurried. Pluto was of noble lineage, a daughter of Hemas or Cronus, depending on which thread of myth you follow. But she lived as if untethered from destiny, a woman apart. Her home was a small, wind-worn hut nestled between two cliffs where the stars felt closer and the cries of owls were her lullabies. It was from there that Zeus saw her, not from Olympus, not from a throne of lightning, but from one of his rare wanderings. In some stories, he took this journey in disguise, not as a test, but as a retreat. The affairs of gods had grown tiresome, the flattery of mortals, cloying. The weight of eternity pressed heavier in those years, and so he walked the earth like a man. He came upon her as she gathered snowmelt in a clay bowl. She did not look up at him as others did. She did not kneel. She simply offered him a place by the fire without asking his name. He stayed the night, then another, and then a week. There was no seduction, no prophecy, just long conversations over steaming herbs, the sound of rain tapping on the wooden roof, and a growing recognition in their silences. Zeus for once did not lead. He listened. Pluto spoke slowly, thoughtfully. She asked questions not about Olympus or glory, but about stillness, about regret. She told him of the dreams she had, of mountains collapsing in slow motion, of birds that sang in dead languages, of children born already knowing how to grieve. And he, weary from the immortality that demanded he never truly pause, found himself drawn into her gravity. They lay together on a night so quiet it felt like the world had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. There was no storm, no divine glow, just two bodies warmed by the same fire. When Zeus left, it was not out of boredom or betrayal. It was because he could not remain. Some part of him, the kingly part, knew he could not have that kind of peace. Not then. Not ever. He left with a touch to her cheek, so light it could have been imagined. Pluto did not chase him. She did not look for signs in the sky. She returned to her solitude, changed not by heartbreak but by knowledge. And in time she bore him a son, Tantalus. He would become a king, known far and wide. He would dine with gods. He would betray them. And he would suffer eternally in Tartarus, reaching forever for food and drink that would retreat just beyond his grasp. But before all that, before the curse, the crime, the legend, he was simply a boy, her boy. Pluto raised him alone near those same cliffs, her hand shaping his childhood from quiet rituals and evening stories. She gave him everything she had, and when he grew too ambitious, too proud, she warned him gently. He did not listen, and so she too joined the ranks of the forgotten, not because she had sinned, but because she had loved a god and birthed a man who could not carry the weight of his origin. Pluto faded from the tales, her name swallowed by the fame of her son's downfall. But in the far north, when the snow settles slowly and the wind hushes as it weaves between the rocks, some say her voice still lingers, soft and sorrowful, a lullaby for a world that never asks for legends, only truth. Not all wealth is golden. Some of it is a bowl of warm water shared by a stranger. Some of it is a son held before he becomes myth. And some of it is a night so quiet, even the gods dare not speak. In the winding highlands of Boeotia, where the air grew thinner and the trees stood crooked like elders with secrets, there once lived a woman named Thaya. Her name was spoken softly, often in reverent tones, though few dared to say too much. Not because she was feared, but because she was remembered in fragments, as if her story had always lived on the edge of forgetting. Thaya was a daughter of Cephissus, the river god who carved the land with his silver fingers, and from him she inherited a quiet kind of strength, steady, flowing, but capable of erosion. She was not born to court or temple. She grew among the hills, learned to follow goat paths through fog, to read the stars not for fate but for rhythm. She did not seek out gods, but they found her. Zeus saw her during a time of unrest. The world had grown loud with sacrifice and war. Cities clamored for favor, for prophecy, for thunder. And in the midst of that noise, Thaya's silence pulled him like gravity. She was not a beauty sculpted to be admired. Her hair was unbraided, her face wind-burned, her voice low from speaking only when needed. She lived not in defiance of Olympus, but beyond its reach. Zeus approached in his own form, though veiled in fog. He did not speak of destiny or passion. He asked her what she believed, and Thea answered without hesitation, that the gods are powerful, but the earth is older. Perhaps he smiled. Perhaps he did not. What passed between them was not recorded in song. There were no witnesses, no bursts of flame, only the wind moving faster that night, stirring the pines into uneasy murmur. From their union came a child, Magnus in some tellings or Delphus in others, founders of lines, shapers of cities. But Thea did not raise her son in grandeur. She taught him the way of streams and shadows, of choosing words like stones in your pocket, small but meant to endure. Over time, her name became tied not only to Zeus, but to the rites of Dionysus. For when the wine god rose in thunderous celebration, it was Thaya who was said to have danced first, alone at the edge of the world, under the pale curve of the moon, her arms raised not in ecstasy, but invocation. They say she became the first to honor him, to let the madness come through her without breaking, that the Maenads, wild women of the god, traced their name through her, that Delphi, the navel of the world, was once hers to bless. But this came later, long after the god left. Zeus, as always, did not stay. He moved on to other names, other silences to ruin. Thaya remained among the cliffs, walking barefoot over frost-kissed stones, her son trailing behind like a shadow still learning its shape. She aged without bitterness. Her eyes grew pale from staring too long into smoke. Her hair thinned like winter grass. And when she died, it is said the earth cracked gently, not in grief, but in recognition. A grove was planted where she was buried, laurel and myrtle. It stood untouched for generations, and those who wandered through it sometimes emerged with songs on their lips they could not remember learning. Thea was not the loudest of Zeus's loves, nor the most tragic. She was the one who spoke once and was remembered forever, not because she bore a god's son, but because she did not let the god consume her. On the bare and wind-swept coast of Thasos, where the cliffs rise like silent guardians over the Aegean and the sea groans with the weight of long memory, there lived a woman named Electra. Not the tragic daughter of Agamemnon, not the storm-eyed heroine of vengeance, but another Electra, older, quieter, and no less shaped by the will of gods. She was an Oceanid, one of the 3,000 daughters of Oceanus and Tethys, spirits of water and cloud, of mist and memory. Yet Electra was different even among her sisters. She did not linger near rivers or springs. She preferred the edge of land, the place where earth and water argued in endless rhythm. The surf was her song. The wind was her breath. And one day, the sky opened. Zeus saw her there, standing on the cliff's lip as though she belonged to neither sea nor land. She did not turn when he approached, not even when the clouds grew low and gray above her. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, as if she had already known he would come. He asked her name. She gave it. He asked her if she was afraid. She said no, and then he asked nothing more. What happened between them on that wind-swept rock was not a romance. It was an alignment, two forces converging like storm and tide. No wedding, no garlands, no witness but the sea. From this convergence came Dardanus, a son who would go on to found the line of Troy. A child born not in a cradle, but in the howl of wind and the salt of waves. A prince whose descendants would one day stir the wrath of gods and summon a war that would echo for centuries. But that was not Electra's story. She raised her son far from the mainland, teaching him the rhythm of water, the patience of stone. She told him that his father was a god, yes, but that his strength must be earned from the earth, not the sky. And Dardanus listened. He built with his hands, not his name. He became legend, but only because she had shaped him first in silence. And when he left across the sea to found cities and bloodlines, Electra remained. She did not follow. She did not ask for tribute. She returned to her cliffs, to her winds, to her solitude. In later years, her name faded into myth. Some said she married the sea. Others said she vanished into the clouds. Still others claimed she became a star, the third in the Pleiades, dim and distant, watching. But none of that was true. Electra was not lost. She simply stepped out of the story because she had never needed it. While the gods roared and mortals wept and cities fell for the children born of lightning, Electra remained above the waves, untouched by monuments, unmoved by epics. And perhaps that is why her story ends not in tragedy nor in worship, but in the quiet clarity of being a woman who lived, who bore a God's child and did not vanish beneath the weight of him. A woman who stayed herself, even as storms passed through her. And so when the sea crashes against the cliffs of Thasos and the gulls cry into the wind with no echo, remember her, not as a lover, not as a mother of war, but as Electra, the one who stood still while Olympus moved.